Listen to me. You have got to watch The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. It's an amazing limited series about Elizabeth Harmon, who rises as a chess star in the 1960s and 70s from the United States. Everything about the series is amazing, in particular how detailed and refined the chess scenes are. Bruce Pandolfini and Garry Kasparov were both consulted for the show, and in this video I'm gonna break down those chess scenes in all of the big moments. I'm just gonna say right now, there are as little spoilers as possible. If you haven't seen it, it's still going to be okay for you to watch. And I'm going to be showing exclusive clips sent to me by the team at Netflix. Before we jump into anything, I just want to thank John Hartmann for putting me in touch with those people, and Olimpiu Urcan, who dug through these games and connected them to games from history. All of their information and relevant projects will be in the description below. Let's jump into it. We're going to kick things off in episode 2 when Beth is playing the final round of the Kentucky State Championship. Her opponent is Harry Beltik. The actor, by the way, is also Dudley from Harry Potter. So Beth has the white pieces and starts out with a 2 knights Caro-Kann against Harry Beltik. Harry thinks for a little bit and then plays the move bishop to g4. If we take a look at the big board, this game is based on Nezhmetdinov versus Kasparian from the mid 20th century. And we obviously see the first few moves. In the game itself, we got h3 attacking this bishop, a trade, and black reinforces the pawns on the light squares. This is very standard. This is played a lot in the 2 knights Caro-Kann. We get g3, g6, both players fianchetto, getting their bishops like this. Castles, knight d7 from Harry Beltik or Kasparian, whoever you're cheering for, queen e2, and here we get d4. Now, this does attack the knight, but the problem is that here, Nezhmetdinov, or Elizabeth Harmon, knight b1, played by her, and the problem for black is that closing the center so early allows the possibility for white to open up an attack later in the game, and a closed center benefits the attacking player. So that's exactly what happens. Knight e7, f4, as I said, queen c7, a4, to try to take away a potential expansion, playing on both sides of the board here by white. And after castles f5, f6, knight d2, bishop h6, we have another moment from the show. The camera now pans to Beth, who is contemplating the position, and she plays the move king to h2. Beltik responds, basically immediately, with the move king to h8. And now is really the moment. Both players are about to have the king side opened up, so Beth thinks a little bit and decides to take the pawn on g6. And that's exactly what happens in the game. Now we get hg6, knight f3, the trade of the dark squared bishops, removing a very important defender from near Beltik's king. Knight comes out to c5, and here Elizabeth is trying to play on both sides of the board, opening up this position, but also maintaining that this attack is possible in the future. We get knight b3, rook comes to d1, rook moves to d8, knight h4. What this move does is it doesn't quite threaten this pawn, but it opens up lines. g4, g5 is a possibility, and this knight was never going to go forward this way, so it comes out like this. Queen c8, bishop out to f3, forcing the queen back here. Knight to f3 is a threat on this pawn, because if pawn takes, you get an attack on f7. All these things happening in the game. Queen g8, h4, and really, the game blows up about 6 or 7 moves later. White brings all of the pieces to the king side, and finally launches out the move h5. Here, black plays c5, and the center absolutely explodes. We get h takes g6, d takes c3, bc3, c4, d4, and now another moment from the show. So here, fearing that the central pawn was too strong, Harry took on d4, initiating a sequence of trades. After pawn takes from Beth, knight takes, and knight takes, we go to our movie clip. Harry pensively plays rook takes d4 with music on this time. Beth responds with a central break e5. You can't take because you're going to lose your rook. Harry thinks a little bit and plays the move f5. At this point, Beth snatches that pawn, and we get this look of utter shock from Harry Beltik after bishop takes pawn. But he didn't really have anything else. And the actual game, the historical game here, I won't spoil the how the scene in the series ended, but the actual game itself features a glorious discovered attack on the queen, and if rook takes rook, queen takes, and the queen comes down, and the game actually, the historical game, ended with an amazing queen sacrifice by Nezhmetdinov. Black takes back, and here is leading to forced checkmate after rook takes, rook f6, king h5, and the king is absolutely stuck. Rook check, king to h7, the rook no longer pins the bishop to the king, and bishop f5 mate. I'm not going to spoil too much about Harry Beltik, but he's a very important character in the show. Let's look at the next one. In episode 3, we're introduced to Benny Watts, who's an important character and the first big rival that Elizabeth Harmon has. They're playing a game at the US Championship in Las Vegas, which begins with a Najdorf Sicilian. An open Sicilian first, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and bishop to c4, the Sozin, very popular and seen throughout the show. e6, bishop b3, and now we start the clip. I'll play it with sound just so you feel the intensity and the emotions. Again, this is from the show, and hopefully it convinces you to watch, or watch again. So, b5 from Benny Watts. Elizabeth castles. Very intense opening. Bishop to d7, not the most accurate move. And here, bishop to g5, with pressure.
I thought he could see what I was planning.
Bishop e7.
I thought he could hear my heart beating and know how panicked I was.
Now a choice for him. How does he take back? Looks like he's gonna take with this guy.
I still had time to get out of it.
So what does he take with? Ah!
But he took the piece, just as I planned.
So that's an interesting one. This one is interesting. This one's interesting because he takes, and she says he took the piece just as I planned. So she obviously had some sort of preparation here with g takes f6. Now, in a lot of these positions, the bishop should probably go here or just not go to d7 very early. I'm not going to bother you with the extent and the intensity of the theory, but here, what Beth, in the actual show, she plays f4. The known approach here now for white is to play queen to h5, a beautiful square for the queen where it can't be touched, and to play knight f5. But I won't spoil the result of this game. You should just watch the show. And if you haven't, and if you have already, then, well, great. Let's keep going. In episode 4, Beth has her first international test against all of the talents around the world. In one of the rounds, she sits down to play against Georgi, Girev, young super talent from Eastern Europe. And this is how their introduction goes.
I'm Georgi Girev.
Beth Harmon.
I'm honored.
He tells her he's honored, which is very cool. I've never done that. They start clocks, and Beth plays the move e4. Now this game is actually based on a game that was played in 2007. That game was very long, and the game in the show goes so long that at some point Georgi offers an adjournment, which is something that they used to do back in the day, which is when they settled the game, came back the next day earlier than the round, after analyzing, there was no computers back then, and they kept playing. So watch what happens when they come back. So this is the position the following morning. And here...
Pawn to rook 5.
Beth Harmon plays pawn to rook 5. Which is really the move h5. Now, the amazing thing is, this did not happen in the real game. In the real game, white took on b7, and after a long struggle in the endgame, the game ended in a draw. That game went rook e2, and the real reason it ended in a draw is because of the opposite colored bishops. They negate each other, and the pawns basically all got chopped off. Both players lost as many pawns as they could, and despite white having a pawn advantage, black was able to stabilize because these pawns run into this, and the winning chances are slim. The move pawn to h5 is an improvement, forcing a breakthrough on this side of the board. For example, if black takes like this, white takes on g6, threatening rook to h7 checkmate, and black cannot play rook to h1 because of the coverage like this. So this shows you how much work went into the analysis and the improvements on these games. I don't know what the logic was for picking the game specifically, but it's just very cool to see something like that. In episode 4, Beth also for the first time takes on the Russian, Vasily BORGOV. This is the point in the show where we're introduced to Elizabeth's biggest rival, and that is the Russian player Vasily BORGOV, loosely based on Boris Spassky. They sit down, they've already shaken hands.
You may start your opponent's clock.
Beth takes a moment to pause, starts the clock, and after some thought, Vasily plays the move pawn to e4. Pawn to e4. And Beth responds with c5. We are at this point noted that her opponent is considered the master of her opening, and that's demonstrated very quickly. As a few moves later, we are seeing that he plays this. The Rosalima.
Que quiere jugar la siciliana cerrada, no la abierta.
And the point here is that Beth is so used to the open Sicilian. That's what they're calling it here. The Rosalimo Sicilian is an opening that keeps the position a little bit more closed. And this game is based loosely, at least throughout the opening, because you can see where the clip ends that Beth plays the move queen to b6 immediately. The actual game doesn't feature this particular move order, but features this one, which kind of transposes back to the game. And the whole point here is that white waits a very long time, makes this trade, and then keeps the center more closed. And this ends up serving in BORGOV's favor, and he continues to apply pressure throughout the game. And the game ends, basically, with this scene. We don't get to see a tremendous amount of the game, but we do get to see the final move. When there's a head shake, an intense stare up at the board and down at this one, and competitive chess players know this feeling all too well. Queen to f3 leaves the king on b6 in a state of peril. The queen is coming, the rook is coming, and it is not a good situation for Elizabeth Harmon. Throughout the show, she aims to outcompete Vasily BORGOV, to outdo him, but he is the senior by many years. He has a lot more experience, and he's playing under the Soviet chess regime. Well, let's see what we're able to do. Episode 5 has a lot of plot development in it, but not a tremendous amount of chess, so we jump ahead to episode 6, which features the end of Beth's training and the beginning of a new tournament. In this clip, some friends are invited over by one of the characters, and Beth is training and trying to solve a puzzle.
How does white win in 3?
And this is the puzzle on the big screen. Some distractions occur in the background. Beth looks at it, and she says, king to queen 7. White has to win in 3 moves. King to queen 7 is the move king to d7. And black doesn't have a whole lot of moves here, right? So if black plays king g7, the point is that after knight d6, there's nothing that black can do. If black goes to f8, knight e6 is mate. If black goes to h6, knight f5 is mate. And if black goes back to f6, knight e8 is mate. And of course the bishop can move, but the point is that the solution is the same. Beth solves this puzzle in about 10 seconds. Now, puzzles are an important way of training. They help you visualize calculation. By puzzle, this is actually a study. This is not a real game. This is an invented position, and Beth solved it basically instantly, further demonstrating her, raw ability, her talent, even though she doesn't usually train this way. At the end of episode 6, Beth sits down and meets once again with Vasily BORGOV in the tournament in Paris. She's obviously under a lot of stress, and I'm going to play the full clip so you experience the emotions. The game is based on the game between Megaranto and Dominguez Perez from 2006, played at the Olympiad. So, first things first, before we have a dramatic grab of the glass, we see an open Sicilian played by the players. This is actually a very similar position as we saw in episode 3 with Benny Watts, except it's played correctly by BORGOV, who plays the move bishop to e7. See Beth obviously dramatically filling up the water and drinking it. BORGOV giving her a little eyebrow. Game continues, and now we see toward the end of this clip, as BORGOV's pawns start coming down the queen side. And if you notice, if you compare the position in the clip with this position and knight back to e2, it is everything that happens in the actual game, which is pretty incredible. And the game obviously is fast forwarding. These moves are being played a lot faster in the show, but they're taking a lot of time in real time. And now the moments kind of which deviates from the actual game. You'll notice that this is the position. This is the actual position. I've changed the big board, and here Beth plays the move queen to d4. This is the only move here that doesn't basically lose immediately, and even though the material is equal, BORGOV is putting very serious pressure on her position. The bishop from the corners are doing stuff, the rook has vision on these pawns, and these pawns are going to be targets. And that is why the clip ends with BORGOV kind of giving her this, inquisitive look. Like, really? And this is actually not how the real game went. They branched off from the real game at a certain moment to make Beth's position under a degree of pressure where she has to defend against BORGOV for the second time. And now we are going to look at games from episode 7, the final episode of the series, when both Beth goes to Moscow to take on all the best players in the world, primarily those from the Soviet Union. In the final episode, Beth goes to battle against, as I said, some of the best players in the world, including Luchenko, who's an older player but a former world champion. And I just included the start of their game for the dramatic effect. Luchenko begins with d4. Beth thinks for a bit, plays knight f6, and Luchenko plays pawn to c4. Very classical opening, presses the clock, and gives her a look. The game is a battle based on Petrosian versus Akopian, played in Armenia in the late 1980s. The game goes on for a long time, is adjourned, and the players go back to their rooms to prepare for an improvement the next day. So the players adjourned in this position, and that night you discover something shocking, which I won't mention, that puts Beth at a serious disadvantage going into the next day. And it's at this point that we are infused the brilliance of Garry Kasparov, who, as I said, did work on the show. In the actual game, we see the move rook f7 played. But here, Garry infuses home-cooked preparation. A gorgeous move. Instead of rook f7, pawn to h5, sacrificing the pawn, and then king back to h8, which is what Beth plays, which leads, after h takes g6, rook takes h4, to actually not black having the king under attack, but white having the king under attack, punctuated by the amazing defensive resource rook c to h7. And you cannot take the rook because of queen g7 check, leading to a devastating checkmate on the white pieces. So I'll show you the clip from the show, which starts around this moment. Luchenko thinks and realizes that he's in some serious trouble.
This put three things against her.
Plays queen to e3.
LUCHENKO having the white pieces.
Rook down to d1. He blocks.
Attack. And that extra.
And here Beth looks at him. The commentator says that three things go against her, including a massive allotment of time. But Beth plays bishop to d4, hitting the queen with the pin. Rook guards. This is coming in. And last but not least, this on this. At this point, Luchenko realizes that he's in grave danger. And we see the full power of the Garry Kasparov analysis on display in the show, which leads to the final round matchup with Vasily BORGOV. In this matchup, we get to see the namesake of the show on full display. The clocks are started, and Elizabeth doesn't play e4 like she did last time, but d4. d5.
Elizabeth Harmon делает следующий ход c2 на c4.
c4.
Ферзевый гамбит.
Ферзевый гамбит. The Queen's Gambit. Pawn to c4. Now, Godmentor has made a video on this game, but actually, it's loosely based on a real game that did occur between Ivanchuk and Wolff in 1993. But in the show, BORGOV starts with e5, which is actually the Albin counter gambit. The players have a very tense struggle that results in this position. A lot later on in the middle game, we see pawn to h3, and BORGOV, at this point, does the following. He decides that he's had long enough, looks at her and says,
Ajit.
which means that he now has to seal his move, which is going to be queen back to g6. The players will go back to their rooms and analyze. This is also the first time that a live game has concluded between these two within a German session. So, let's see what happens the next morning. Now, this is the part of all of this analysis work that I'm probably most proud of myself. If you look at the actual game, here the move g4 was played. But if you look at where our clip starts, you'll notice that those two pawns are still on g3 and h3. So how did this happen? I had to recreate the process. Well, we get knight to e6. Then we got rook coming to a4, attacking the pawn on e4, defended by the knight. Beth played b3, and here we got rook takes e4 and knight takes d6. And rather than taking the knight, which would result in a fork for BORGOV, he plays the move bishop takes e6. Let's watch the clip. A flurry unfolds. Bishop e6. D takes c6. C d6. Beth pushes the pawn. But here, BORGOV plays a move that holds everything together. And is a shock.
Shit.
We hear an audible expletive, and it becomes evident that this is a move that was not prepared for. The move d6 to d5. Black seems to hold everything together. The e8 square is under protection, the rook is covered, the rook also defends the central pawns. So, how on earth does Beth Harmon break through here? I'm about to show you the final sequence of moves in the final clip that I have. So if you haven't seen anything yet, you can get out while you can. This is your spoiler warning, but I'm about to go. In this position, Beth played bishop to c5, defending her pawn, and BORGOV played back with the queen, covering promotion. Beth swung the queen over to f3, BORGOV played queen c6, attacking the bishop, and Beth locked it in with pawn to b4. Queen e8 was played. BORGOV looked at Elizabeth and offered her a draw. This caused an audible murmur and shock. People were saying that, she probably should take the draw. It would still be a stellar result. She triumphantly shook her head and played a glorious combination. She gave a check, king went back to h8, and she sacrificed her queen. After pawn takes f6, rook f6, the undeniable check is coming, extracting the queen from where it is, and the pawn is going to promote. So BORGOV brings out the queen, all of that happens, and rather than taking and being a bishop down in an endgame, he goes all in. He plays rook to e2 check, king f1, sacrifices the rook to give one more check, and we have our final clip. The rook slides back to f2, the queen comes out to e4, and the very gracious king to d2, which is exactly what happens in the game. Elizabeth Harmon has a rook and bishop up. BORGOV resigns, stands up, and applauds his opponent, which is what they say Boris Spassky did when he played against the genius who was Bobby Fischer. And that, my friends, is how the final game of the Queen's Gambit concluded. An original piece of analysis and variation I was able to reconstruct for all of you, resulting in the triumphant victory of Elizabeth Harmon over Vasily BORGOV. And with that, my friends, we've come to the conclusion of this recap video. If you're a long-time subscriber and you've seen some of my other videos, let me know how you enjoyed the analysis of the chess, and definitely make sure to check out the show if you haven't already. If you're brand new to the chess world, welcome to you as well. There's a lot of videos here on YouTube for beginners, for you to get, especially on this channel, to get your openings and tactics sorted out. There's a lot of different chess websites you can check out to play on. Many of them are free. And yeah, chess is pretty cool, but you're gonna need a little bit of advice. You're not just gonna be able to jump in and play like Elizabeth Harmon. Anyway, that's it. I worked hard on this, and I do appreciate all of your support. If you made it this far, drop a comment, drop a like, and I'll see you in the next video.